more cups.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so clearly I am not Kara. Actually, it may not be clear because I don't have my video on, but I'm not Kara teaching class this morning. Instead, we are doing something a little bit different where Holly and I are going to co-teach the CMA class, which is going to give everybody a little bit of a broader look at what a CMA can look like and how it can be done differently, because everybody does their CMAs a little bit differently, which is really pretty neat if you ask me, how we can all be successful and yet do things differently. So we're going to take a look at that. I've got a very interesting property for us today that I sold like in the middle of 2020. So we're going to take a look at it because it is harder to do a CMA on this particular type of property. So we're going to take a look at that and be able to go from there. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. All right. Everybody see my screen okay?
Yep.
All right, perfect. So the property that we are going to be looking at to do a CMA, and what we are basically pretending is, even though my buyers just bought this home in August, they've turned around and they say, Jordan, we want you to come and sell this home. So what do? We do a CMA, see what's changed, what's going on in that home. And this was a for sale by owner. So when we look up the past property, we're not going to see it, but that's okay, because we're going to still be able to get a lot of information that we need. So first things first is, when you're talking to somebody who wants to list their home and you're going to be doing a CMA for them, you want to ask them some very simple questions. How long have you owned the home? How long have you actually been living there, or is there a tenant there? What are some recent updates you've done in the last 5 years? A lot of people are going to say that they've done recent updates, but recent updates to them was 10 years ago. That's not recent, that's 10 years ago. You want to ask them how old the major systems are in the home: the roof, the HVAC system, the hot water heater, different things like that, just so you kind of know where you're going on. You also want to ask them if there's things like a pool, if the backyard is fenced. Not that it adds value, but at least the fence doesn't add value. It just kind of adds some marketability. Just getting to know the property a little bit more, even before you go and see the home in person. It's important to note that everything that we do on the CMA before we see it in person is all subject to seeing it in person, because there are people who will tell you that they've done so many updates in the home, and you walk in and they're in the middle of so many updates, but not quite complete yet. And you just never know what you're walking into. So you want to make sure that you're clear that you're going to do the best CMA you can, but it is just an average numbers, and you won't be able to give anything more fully until we are closer and actually seeing it in person. So first things first is you go to Matrix and you type in the address. And you can search that right here. And search. So I know that it's 2309 South Stowe Road. All right, so what am I looking at here? I'm looking at any time that it's been listed on the MLS. So I like to sort by the date that it was listed and kind of see, okay, it was listed and withdrawn in 94, and then it was sold in 95, and then it was expired in 97, sold in 2003, and sold in 2004. An important note for this is any home listed prior to 1993 will not show up on the internet. That is when they started putting things on the MLS. So that is about as back history as you can get as far as the MLS goes. Now, of course, the tax records go back further, but as far as MLS, that's as far back as you're going to get. Also, when you look at a lot of these, you'll see the pictures are taken down, or there's only one picture. And that's very common. What they used to do is take all the photos down except for the front photo on all the MLSs. But I like to click through and see what's going on. Okay, they've got 3 bedrooms here. That's really weird how they've got it listed with 2 full bathrooms and 7 half baths. You get to see some funny things. But this one listed as 4 bedrooms, 3 full baths. And this was in 2003 when it sold. And then in 2004 when it sold, 4 bedrooms, 3 full bathrooms, about 2,000 square foot. So we're going to take this and we're also going to open up the realist tax. So I'm clicking right here on the tax and I open it in a new tab. And what I like to do is compare the details. So while we're looking at this, the MLS says 4. What does this one say? And you can scroll through the tax records and kind of see what it says. Tax records say 3 bedrooms, MLS says 4. Total bathrooms, tax says 2, MLS says 3. Okay, well, there's some discrepancy there. So we know that that's something we're going to have to talk to the clients about, right? And as I'm going through this, guys, just so you know, this is completely casual. Please open up if you have any comments or concerns or anything like that, or anything to add if you have something to add. So we're comparing tax records. We're also looking at square footage and acreage. So it's a little over an acre. It's got an attached garage, what the roof is made out of. Garage capacity according to the MLS is 1. Year built. Tax says 1987, MLS says 1978. So there's some discrepancies, right? So we know we're going to have to talk about a lot of this stuff. It's also saying the tax records is 1490 square foot and the MLS says 2078. Where is that coming from? We're going to find out. So when we look back on the pictures, you can tell right off that there's 2 different styles of home here. This, believe it or not, is actually a log cabin, this part right here. So that was probably the 1,400 square foot. This looks like an addition. Even just looking at from the old pictures, you can tell it looks like an addition. And that's probably where they get the extra square footage from. So we know that's probably where our discrepancy is there. And so we know that that's what we're looking for. So when we go, and the reason we're doing all this is because we want to get us familiar with the property that we are comparing to and trying to find value for before going and trying to find other properties to compare to. Y'all following me so far?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Sounds wonderful.
All right.
Yes. Thank you for asking.
All right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to duplicate this. So that way I've got my tax records up right here that I can go back and compare to. I've got the most recent activity on the MLS here that I can go back and compare to. And then I'm going to go to the main page and I'm going to search. This is where I start my search. And I'm going to start with pending and sold. And I want to start, I always start in the subdivision if I can. So where's our subdivision? It's right here and it's in Pungo. It's a log cabin in Pungo, y'all. We're in for a treat.
That's nice.
So Pungo. So in the last 180 days for both pending and sold and any active listings, there's 30 matches in Pungo. Now, if y'all know anything about Pungo, they've got a lot of new construction there. And they've got a lot of nicer homes. So we're going to kind of weed through some of these pretty quickly. This one was built in 2021. We know that clearly does not compare to our 1980 log cabin. But let's see if we can find anything else as far as year built. Here's one built in 74 with an attached garage, 4 bedrooms, 2 full bath, 1,500 square foot. So about the size of the original house, without the addition. This one has an in-ground pool. Now I know because I asked, and also because I sold the house, that our 2309 South Stowe Road also has an in-ground pool and a pool house. It's in disrepair, but it's there. So that's important to know as well while we're looking at all these. So this one has an attached two-car garage. And
He
it's sold.
listens. I'm like, come on, bud, like, let's go in here. And even I got him into this room, which I'm sure he's been in for.
So this looks like it could be a fairly good comp. It sold in November. So we're looking in the last 6 months. Similar in acreage, just a little bit smaller. So we can kind of look through and see what the condition looks like. Not the greatest. The fact that there's no interior pictures usually tells me that the interior does not want to be photographed. So we can go ahead and select that, and we can scroll through really any of these. So then this comes up, and this looks like a nice home. Updated. We've got smaller, substantially smaller, about the size of the original house. It's a cottage ranch, no pool, less acreage, but the fact that it's got some updates and it's move-in ready, it then sold for $360. If you remember, our last one sold for $298. So there's a pretty substantial difference right there, just in the fact that it's move-in ready. So we're looking there. We're looking here. Okay, so this home built in 72. It's on 1.5 acres, so a little bit more. 4 bedrooms, 2 full bath, 2,100. So that one's closer to actually what our log cabin is with the addition. And sold in November, sold for $375. So this one does not have, it's got barn and horses allowed, which is kind of one of those, it adds value to some people and it doesn't matter to other people. So in reality, what an appraiser is looking for and what we're looking at when we're looking at a CMA is what's the appraiser going to look at? So the appraiser is looking at the majority. Are majority of people going to care that it's, has a barn and that horses are allowed? Maybe in that area a little bit more, but still not enough to substantiate any true value. There's no pool, and as far as garages go, there's no garage. So our house actually has a little bit more in that it's got a garage and a pool. But we don't know about the condition of this one because we've just got one photo. And we just continue going through and looking at each of these, trying to see, okay, what does our max look like? What does our minimum look like as far as subdivision goes? Now, because this is a log cabin, there's not a lot of comparisons as far as log cabins. There's no log cabins actually that have sold in Pungo. So what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this tab so we can keep our search open. And we come back here and I'm going to do another search for pending sold within the last year. I stretch it out to a year because log cabins are so rare in our area that when they sell, it's kind of a big deal and you want to look for that. I'm not going by subdivision this time because I've got subdivision here. So I've got the area. What does the area call for in value? What I want to look at is what do log cabins look at in value in our area as a whole? So I'm only looking at simple ownership. I'm going to go to style, log home. Only 17 matches. And when I search, I can pull up my map and see there's almost nothing down here on the south side. Most of them are up in Gloucester, Toronto, or over here in the Windsor, Isle of Wight type area. So this one that did sell sold for 650,000. Now this was substantially more square footage, substantially bigger, substantially nicer. So we're looking at all of the pictures, trying to see, okay, so that sold for 650. What do we have to be at for ours? What other homes have sold on the log cabins have sold on the south side? There's one for 271, still bigger, same bedrooms and bathrooms, more acreage in Suffolk area. What does that look like? Okay, it's extremely dated all over the place. But it's still sold for 271. So let's come down here. This one sold for 357, approximate square foot, 2,900, 3 bedrooms, 2 full bath. Acreage is larger. We're also looking at, well, septic, which is what ours is. No pool. Ours has a pool. This one has a detached 2-car garage. Ours has an attached 1-car garage. So pretty similar there. And we just continue going through and looking at all of these. We've got 245, we've got 460, and just getting a good general idea of what log cabins are going for in this area. So this one was a pretty good comparable in that the interior is the same, the log cabin style, updated but not fully renovated. You can see it's a 3-bedroom, 2 full bath, 2,400 square foot, so just slightly larger. It's on septic, but it does have city county water, no pool. It's got a detached 3-car garage. We've got a 1-car attached garage, so they've got a little bit more there. And this one sold for $295 in Newsoms, Virginia, way out in the boonies. But we're in Pungo. Pungo's a pretty happening area, especially when you look at sold prices. So I'm back in our Pungo search. You can see right here, Pungo. And our Pungo search tells us that the lowest home price was $90,000. 2-bedroom, 1 bath, 1,200 square foot. Not much of anything. Our next lowest was 270. And then 298, and then it jumps up to 360. And we can see all that when we go right here. So if we are assuming middle of the road quality, we're assuming middle of the road for condition, for property value, for things like that, we know we're not on the low end, right? And then we look back on the log cabin search, and we can kind of see similar. Now, land in these other areas is not as expensive as it is in Pungo, so we have to take that into consideration as well. The appraiser, when he came through and did this, had one heck of a time figuring out value. So that's what I want us to start working on now. Does anybody have questions so far on why I did 2 different searches, what I'm looking at, what we're searching for?
I guess I don't really have any questions. Why
I'm
you do
sorry to ask
different
this.
searches. I see, obviously scarcity would require you to, continue searching in outer areas, but would you potentially go back further in time too? Instead of 180 days, could you go back, 9 months instead of 6?
You could, but when there's not a lot of inventory anywhere. But the reason that I don't like to go that far back for the area search is because I want to look at what appraisers are looking at. And appraisers would rather go out in an area rather than go out in days. Reason being is because the market changes so much, especially here recently, the market has changed so much where the difference of a month between market time can be drastic.
That makes sense. Fair enough.
Oh,
So- Yes, Adam.
I'm sorry, ma'am. Can I ask a silly question?
That's probably not a silly question, but what's up?
Can I ask a silly question? Right. Jordan, ma'am.
Yes, of course.
Oh, yes, ma'am. So the appraisal, my misperception was if we're doing CMAs for investors versus appraisers, because there's real quick example. This appraiser, he was a listing agent as well, and the condos he knew from his appraiser experience, I think that they wouldn't appraise for certain loans, even though that's not in our lane because we don't deal with loans. That's appraisers kind of thing. So, from your expertise, would you always make the comparison of CMAs to appraisers, or can we go out of bounds and say they're for investors, like different purposes like that? Is that too far fetched or?
So what you're talking about is condos being approved for different loan types, and that is not that is within our wheelhouse. So
Okay.
if you look for condos, if you're doing a CMA for a condo, you need to look up on the HUD websites and the VA websites to see if it is FHA and VA approved. If it's not FHA or approved, then that's going to drastically affect your property's value, because only a conventional or cash loan can get there, which substantially deteriorates the amount of buyers that are able to purchase that property, which then decreases the value.
Wonderful way to phrase that. Yes, ma'am. So, and on your log cabin, I'm sorry to talk too much. One more question, if that's okay. If the log cabin had the possibility of asbestos in the tiles, like they had tiles that hadn't been checked for asbestos, how much would you have discounted the CMA from your expertise?
So asbestos is not in my wheelhouse, right? We're not contractors.
Okay.
We go there, and unless they specifically tell us we've got asbestos and it's chipping and it's whatever it is, that's not in our wheelhouse.
Okay.
Asbestos is actually a great insulator.
Okay.
As long as it's not
That's wonderful.
and it isn't opened up.
Thank
But
you for explaining that to me. I appreciate it. Wonderful explanation.
the answer to any question of how much value would you add or how much value would you take away in any CMA at any point in time is always, it depends. It depends on the market that we're in. It depends on the area it's in. It depends on what is common for that area, for that neighborhood, for what's going on. So that's why it's important for us to know, be very strong in what is the market and what does the market look like, and be familiar with the areas.
Yeah,
And what is the best use of land in the area? What do people like to do in that area? People in Chicks Beach like to go to the beach. Doesn't matter your budget in Chicks Beach, they like to go to the beach. People in Pungo like to, go off and shoot their guns and go hunting and leave everybody else alone. That's what they like to do. There are generalities of areas of highest and best space, and highest and best use, and different things like that we can kind of know as agents. People who live in Norfolk tend to like the city life more. They like to go to bars. They like to go to different things like that. So that's what we're looking at as well when we're looking at proximities and things like that. So does that answer your question?
Well, yeah, wonderful explanation. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.
All right. So going back, looking here, we can also look through and just give a very good eye. And the more you do this, and the more you look at these things, the faster you're going to be at determining, okay, here's square footage. This one is a little bit more, this one's a little bit less. What does that look like? This one was built in 91, this one was built in 68. So overall, this one is probably a little bit better comp. We can look at it and say, okay, that's beautiful. We can look at the agent remarks, 2.6 acres, Pungo, all brick, screened in porch, So all sorts of different things that you can learn from looking at other listings. Now this one was built in 2021. That's clearly not a good comp. So this one looks like it could be interesting. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 bath, a little bit bigger, more acreage. Looks like lots of new updates and upgrades have been done. Sold for $425. So, and then we look back on our log cabin. We've got the $295 where we know land is a little bit cheaper. All sorts of different things. So looking at all of these, we can really start to get an idea of where value is and where value lies when we're looking at a, middle of the road. Does anybody want to take a stab or a guess as far as what the appraiser gave the value of this property to? Knowing that for log cabins, they range from 170 to 650. And knowing that Pungo ranges from 90,000 to 1.2 million. And a lot of ours are ranging between, some of our best comps are ranging between 289 and 430 as far as area goes. And then as far as log cabins go, we said, leave this one down here, was one of our best ones at 295. We also had this one that I forgot to show you guys. That very similar square footage, just slightly larger, 4 bedrooms, 2 bath. More acreage, but again, land is cheaper in Suffolk than it is in Pungo. Log cabin, no pool, and no garage. So this was another fairly decent comp in that the amount that it didn't have and the things that it doesn't have and the things that it does have kind of equal out compared to our property. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am. Makes a lot of sense.
So what value, does anybody want to take a guess at what value the appraised value came in at in August?
10% above the tax assessment. You're
We
probably
don't
looking
ever want to do that.
Okay, don't do that. Sorry.
I'm just
Nope.
guessing. I'm just gonna take a quick guess. 380?
The tax assess, or not the tax assess, the appraised value came back at 350. We were under contract for 290. So my clients got a lot of equity built in, but that was a great guess, Lily, because Pungo land is worth more. So what I do, I'm just going to go through this really quickly, and then I'm going to let Holly take over and do hers. I do my CMA a little bit differently. If I was doing this to go with a client, I would pick my 3 best comps as much as I can. I try to get active, pending, and sold. Sold is gold because that's what people are actually paying for in the area. And instead of coming down here and doing a CMA like Kara has taught you, I do things a little differently, and I print off each individual listing, and I then highlight the information and lay out what's good, what's bad, what's the same, what's different. And I'll show you guys that here in just a second. I just did one last night. All right. So as you can see here, I just went through and I highlighted the information. I highlighted what I was looking at. If things were good or worse, I put a plus or a minus sign in the highlighter and then make little notes on what's going on. So that was the actual property. And then Here's another version. So I print these off and I go through each individual listing with my clients. And then what I do is all of the ones that are the best, I print off this quick CMA sheet, which gives us the averages, the mean, median, modes, all of those things, which let me show you how we do that here real quick. So if these are the 3 that I wanted to do, I go to quick CMA and this generates it automatically for me. And sold, we can look and see pool, no pool, pool, the square footage, list price per square foot and sold price per square foot, which never matters. Appraisers don't care about that, so we don't care about that. But we can look at what the average is and see what the average days on market is, so we can prepare our clients for what that looks like. So that is what I do after I go through all of those things with them. Questions, comments, or concerns from you guys?
That's wonderful.
All right. Holly, you are up, darling.
I do have, well, it's not a question. I just like to confirm that I'm on the right track here. The ones that you clicked on 3 properties and then you went to the CMA tab.
Quick CMA.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Thank you so much, Jordan, for that. It's very insightful, especially with having such a unique property that you were featuring on there. So I'm going to show you guys how I do the CMA. Jordan's is very, very thorough and in depth, and she had to do an extensive amount of research because her property was unique. So I'm going to focus on a little bit more common of a property, and I'm going to show you a couple of different ways on how you can basically present it to your clients. I do use the Create a CMA tab through Matrix that allows you to put a whole presentation together. But I also want to highlight that Command has a really great listing presentation as well that looks really polished versus just the generic one from Rain. But let me go ahead and share my screen with you guys. As you can see, we are just logged in right here to the main dashboard of Matrix. I'm actually going to show you a house that I sold. It's been about almost 2.5 years since I sold it. And they're going to look at listing again here soon. So I actually ran a quick CMA very similar to what Jordan just did for you guys. But just to kind of get started, I do the same thing with pulling it up. This property I helped them buy. So I already know that it's in MLS. So I'll pull up the most recent one like she did, but I also pull up the tax records just the same. Basically, what I'm doing by pulling up the tax records is when I go to pull comparables, I want to have a quick reference because this isn't an active listing and it's been more than 6 months since it's sold. So when I go to pull up additional information, it's not going to like pop up like I want it to. So when I do my search, I do a traditional residential search. So this is also, guys, how you do a quick CMA when you're working with your buyers and you want to see if the property is priced fairly. So if you start typing in the address, it should auto-populate. And then you're going to want to do pending and sold, which automatically sets it up for the last 6 months. This particular bar right here is referring the radius, and it is auto set to 0.25, so 1/4 of a mile. You will need to adjust this when you're in more rural areas and you're not finding properties, or if you have a very unique property and you need to look outside that neighborhood. So if the neighborhood is mostly a ranch style home and you have this one random 2-story and there's only like 10 in the neighborhood and none of them have sold in the past 6 months, you might have to move outside of that neighborhood. So you might have to adjust that. But I always start within a 1/4 mile radius within 6 months, and then I start to make adjustments after that. and I only make one adjustment at a time. So if I pull up the properties and I'm not seeing what I'm looking for, I'll change this first, but nothing else. If I'm still not seeing what I want, I'll switch it back to a quarter mile, and then I'll change it to a year. And then, one adjustment at a time, because you don't want to put too many different variables into your search when you're trying to find comparables, because the more creative you get, the further away from an actual price will be. Like, it's much easier for you to work with what you have and make adjustments that way, because then you can justify it versus getting too creative, if that makes sense. So as you see, I already have 13 properties, so this should turn up a pretty decent CMA. Now, when you're looking at your property, the first thing that I focus on is my square footage. When you're dealing with neighborhoods like these that have been established, pretty much all of them are built around the same thing, around the same time of year and stuff like that. So I don't have to necessarily focus on that, but you do not want to compare a brand new construction to a 1988 build. Like, that's just not going to make sense to the appraiser. So you don't want to do that to yourself either. But my first focus is looking at the square footage. So I always sort my properties by the square footage because I want to be in that general area. I do give some wiggle room because square footage it matters, but it's not going to matter that much within like 100 square feet. So 50 to 100 square feet is kind of where my comfort level is when I'm making my adjustments. And then my next biggest focus is making sure that the bedroom and bathrooms match up. Now, if you have a half bathroom, that does add more value, but at the same time, it's not like a deal breaker. So it's okay to include a half bathroom, even though your particular property does not have one. So I like to make sure that I have at least 3 active listings and 3 sold if the comps actually support that. So this particular neighborhood has been very active. The unfortunate part that I'm running into is these higher priced ones aren't closed yet. So I may include those when I'm actually sitting in front of my client and let them know that I don't know what it's technically going to sell for. Because as you pull the other properties, like this one right here, to me is an outlier because it is so low compared to everything around it. So I might look at this one and try to figure out why. It just honestly, looking at the exterior of it, I can tell that it's probably a little bit more ran down. And so I'll just kind of double check it and look at the inside, which the inside doesn't look that bad other than paint, but there you go. Now you got your kitchen that looks like it needs to be renovated. You got that, in my personal opinion, ugly white tile that just makes it look really, really dated. So that's probably what hurt this property. It was listed at 270 originally, and it ended up selling for 258, and it sat on the market for almost 2 months. These are also things that I consider when I'm looking at properties. And then I also double check for the disclosures. The reason why I do that is because if you have a bank owned property or a short sale, that could affect its price on what it's sold for. Short sales have a tendency to sell for short sales because they're selling for less than what is owed on the property, but that does not necessarily mean that it's selling less than its market value. So my immediate thought is to get it out of the way and not consider it. But if the property happened to sell at market value, because we see a lot of banks doing that, is still pushing for market value for the property, you want to keep that in mind as well. Is it good to also look at owner for bank or possible investors? I'm not understanding that question.
I just it was a question for everybody else. But I always look at the owner as well to see if it was an actual owner or if it was an investor who possibly flipped it,
yeah.
or if it's a bank owned property.
Yes, that's actually a very good point, because when you see that it's owned by an LLC or something along those lines, you can usually pretty much guarantee that it's a house flipper and stuff. if you work in the peninsula, there's one house flipper name that you'll see a lot, and that's Joe Fortune. So I always look for those properties too. And the reason why when I'm pulling comps for a listing is because he gets it to appraise like every single time. Is he a good house flipper? That's up for debate, but he always prices his like slightly above market value on what you see what everybody else is doing, and yet he manages to get it to appraise. Like he's always trying to get his properties to sell at appraisal value. So I do look at who flipped it as well, so I'm glad you brought that up. But when you're looking at like if it's an estate sale, like estate sales, I don't treat them exactly like short sales and bank owned, but I also take those into consideration because 9 times out of 10, they're selling it and the heirs just want to get whatever they can get for it. So they're not necessarily getting top market value. Those homes have a tendency to be sometimes neglected too. So just trying to keep in mind on who's selling it and the reason why it's being sold when you're pulling your comps as well. So this particular property, even though it's very close to what my particular listing will be, at the same time, there was a reason why it was sitting on the market. And I'm going to go ahead and say that it was horrible pictures because like I don't think that this is a fair representation on this property. Like I don't know if they took the pictures with their cell phone or anything like that, but if you have listings, guys, invest the money and hire a photographer to do it because you're doing your seller a disservice. So for whatever reason, this property sold for lower than what everything else was selling in the particular area. And, you know, it could have looked worse when we got into it or whatever. I don't know, but this is where I start. I start at the square footage and then I look for any outliers. And when I have those, I try to either get rid of them or justify them for being inside the comps. So I try, if I have enough to support the square footage, then I stick to that. But I also want to take in consideration these price tags here. So this particular property is also listed, it's on the same street, but it's listed for 275 when everything else around it has been listed on the upper part. So I would want to look at that as well and try to figure out why. It's just like Jordan pointed out before, it's only an exterior picture, and when you see that, it's usually something going on. But if you read the agent remarks, we see in this particular instance that it's tenant occupied. So tenant occupied is a little tricky because tenants don't want their privacy invaded. So they're not usually comfortable with the house having pictures taken and stuff like that. So I usually do still try to check out the property unless it says something like needs this, needs that, or whatever. But like I do still try to check out the property. So this one, because it was it's under contract already. It's only been on the market for 8 days. And we already know how competitive the market is. I'm going to go ahead and assume that it has multiple offers. So I'm going to assume that it's under contract for higher than 275, just because the market so far supports more than that, with the exception of this one particular property. Another thing that I look at when I'm considering different properties is, are they alike? I'm not going to get a 2-story in here and compare it to a rancher. So I know when I'm looking at properties, I'm going to definitely exclude anything that has 2 stories in it. So this one right here, which you see that giant jump in price, is a 2-story, even though the square footage isn't that far off. It's a 2-story. So like, it's not going to compare to the other property. This one is about 300 square feet more, and it has an extra bedroom. So if I was skimping by on the properties, then I might include this and adjust it accordingly. But since I don't need to, I would not include it for that particular reason. It's significantly larger and it has an extra bedroom. So just looking at these alone, I'll probably just click on these and stop at that 351 because I don't need it. Right. So When you're looking at these, you can do the quick CMA like Jordan showed you, and that's like a little summary page. That's actually what I took to my clients. But if you do the more extensive one, then you will be able to plug these in and it will do a side-by-side comparison. I believe Kara did cover that method in her class previously, so you can always refer back to that. But just like gauging off of it, it's looking pretty good. And then we also want to consider these days on market here. So obviously everything is moving really quickly. This one house that is a very good representation of what the interior of my client's house looks like. This is one of the ones that I was like, hey, this is like your house, but the only difference is it does have a garage where my client's house does not. So how much is an appraiser going to give credit for a garage? I actually recently attended an appraisal class. It was called Think Like an Appraiser. So an appraiser held the class, and he was just breaking down the things that they take in consideration, because like Jordan pointed out earlier, they will go outside of the market area to find a more reasonable comparable, because it's going to be easier for them to adjust that way versus trying to create two like properties, right? So it's going to be easier for them to go to a different city to look at what log cabins are running there versus trying to make a brick comparable to a log cabin. And the way that he explained it is, if he can see how it affected that market over there, then he could take a like property there and compare it into a price point here. So let's say we have an identical house here that sold for 300,000 and an identical house there that sold for 300,000 or 305, very, very comparable in market value. Then he would be able to apply that same standard for the log cabin. Does that make sense to everybody? I'm gonna take your side.
Yes, ma'am. Makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of
Huh?
sense.
So when you're pulling these properties, you want to make sure, again, that your square footage is lining up, that you have comparable bedroom and bathrooms, and property condition. Now, property condition, you may not know until you get there, and I always take that into consideration when I am talking to different homeowners. I give them a good gauge on it. And then I always considered the tax assessed value. And the reason why I do that is because I know that I'm on the right track, right? So if you pull a property and you think that it's going to sell for 300,000, and then you go over there and you look at your tax assessed value and it's 255, 300, and you add 10% to that, which that's not really realistic anymore. They're actually selling for quite a bit more. You can at least know that you're on the right track. I also like to look at this little range right here. And guys, this is kind of like how you got to treat it kind of like how you treat Zillow, right? So you don't want to get excited about this number and think that you're going to sell it for the top number or whatever. You have to look at the market and make sure it supports. But I like to use it as a double check kind of thing, so that I know that I'm kind of in the right ballpark. If I think I can get more for it, then I'm obviously going to go for that, because that's in better interest of my client. And if it's going to sell for less, then I have to have that hard conversation with my client to be able to explain that to them as well. A lot of these properties that are needing more to get them up to market value, but the seller doesn't necessarily see that, when you have to sell to an investor, you have to be able to explain to your client that you have to appeal to that investor. An investor is not going to buy a property to break even. So you want to make sure that you're explaining that well, and it's good to understand what's selling and what's not selling in the neighborhood. So that's pretty much how I do a quick one, just to kind of gauge it. And again, you can use the CMA right there to create a new one. And it literally allows you to go ahead and plug in all the information, and it takes you through it step by step through all the pages so that you have one built up on Rain. But if you go over here to command, you'll see under their design templates under print that they have different listing presentations that you can actually put together for the listing as well. And when you're looking at it, it just has all the basic pages that you're going to fill in pertaining to that particular house. You can pull a picture of the front of the house off of MLS if it was listed before. You could go and take one quick with your phone. Anything to make it more personalized, to show that you did your research and you put all this work into it. And you can pull neighborhood snapshots. When you're doing these neighborhood snapshots, you want to make sure that the information on there is relevant. Some of these snapshots, because it is just a numbers games, are not taken in consideration the neighborhoods like Virginia Beach does. Like Virginia Beach neighborhoods are a big deal. I've used this example all the time. I'll use it again. There's a particular neighborhood in Virginia Beach where half the neighborhood is zoned for Green Run, and then the other half of the neighborhood is zoned for Princess Anne High School. The value in property is about $25,000 difference. That's how much that particular school zone impacts that neighborhood. So make sure when you're doing a neighborhood snapshot that you are taking that into consideration as well, because you may need to explain it, why it may look a little bit less to a person who has that ideal school zone, or a little bit more to the person who doesn't have that ideal school zone as well. And then you'll be able to plug in your different properties that you're going to be comparing it to and breaking it down. Now, the CMA that is on RAIN, you have the ability to have all the pictures in the property so that they can see it. I don't recommend printing all of that out for them, simply because it's a lot of pages, and all the information in there kind of becomes redundant after a while anyway. So you want to still keep them engaged. If you bring your computer or a tablet or anything along those lines, you can pull up the property and you could be able to show them the pictures if you need to justify the price difference. So if you walk into a property that hasn't been renovated since the 90s and all the houses are selling for $300,000, but they've all been renovated within the past 5 to 10 years, you're going to need to be able to explain that to your clients. So it's important that you be able to show them the pictures, because they need to understand their competition. By utilizing this that we have available, by the way, if y'all don't know this, only KW has this, so I don't want you guys thinking that you could just Google search and pull up something like this. KW has made this very convenient for us to be able to put together an entire presentation for you so that you can look very professional and very polished in front of your clients. Doing all the extensive research ahead of time before you get in there, so you have a good idea on what you're walking into, putting it all together in a nice template so that it matches, it's uniform, and it's very streamlined, is really going to help you seal the deal and make you look like the local expert while you're presenting these things to your client. Any questions?
I have a question. What do you suggest for doing these when the property is not listed in the MLS?
So you're always going to be able to get something around about by doing that radius search. So no matter whether, like with Jordan's particular property, it was a for sale by owner, so it wasn't in the MLS before when they pursued purchasing it. But just by plugging it within a proximity, you'll be able to pull what's going on in the area. So even though you may not have the exact, like it wasn't listed before or whatever, you'll be able to know what the surrounding houses are doing. So when you go to plug it in to create your CMA, you will still be plugging in, well, let's not do that. I just want to get to the next page real quick. So you'll still be able to plug in the different pages, and then you'll be able to put in, you guys are wondering what I'm doing. I'm pulling out the pictures. So when you pull in the property, when you get to this page right here, if you had a previous MLS number, you'd be able to plug that in, or you can pull it in from the tax ID, or you can do a realist search right here and then plug in the address. So let's just plug in this address since it happens to be convenient right here. It helps if I fill it out correctly. So you put in the street number, the street name, and then where it was from, and see your results. And then it automatically pulls it up, and then you fill it from selected. So even though this property, if it was not on the MLS, which it was, but even though this property was not on the MLS, you would be able to plug in the information and then go over here to your comparables and then add it like this. It helps if I get it in there though. Sometimes when you're not paying attention and then you go too quickly, it's not going to pick up what you're doing. So you want to make sure. See how it's still saying 5,000 matches because it doesn't like the way I'm putting it in there. Bear with me. Technical difficulties. 1507. Arrow. I want it to pop up and ask me, do I mean? Otherwise, it's not going to do it. There we go. And now see, now we got a more normal number. So when you pull it up, and then let's just pretend like all of these houses kind of match up. We'll just pick like these right here. And we're going to pretend that this works, right? It has it right here, and then you can make your adjustments. Now, I don't mess with this adjustment page too much unless I'm a little bit more comfortable with knowing like how much a half bathroom is going to pull. So what I do to try to offset that, this is just a piece of advice when I'm pulling comparables. So let's say you have a 4-bedroom with 2.5 bathrooms. I will, and there's not that many comps, I will pull properties of equal, of lesser and greater value to kind of balance that out. So if I'm a 4-bedroom, 2.5 bathroom, but it's mostly 3 bedrooms, and then I have a few 5 bedrooms, but no 4 bedrooms, then I'll pull a couple of 5 bedrooms and a couple of 3 bedrooms to kind of balance it out. You want to be careful with that because, again, that's one of those variable things, but this keeps me from having to start really doing some math. So it helps me with my guesswork, but it is guesswork at that point. So after you plug it all in, you'll be able to see like your average and stuff to help gauge your thing. Does that make sense, Shelley?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions?
Holly, ma'am, are you a fan of the similar program in the National Realtor Association? I think it's called RPR.
I've dabbled with RPR. RPR is a lot more extensive, so I'm not comfortable enough with like teaching a course on it or anything like that because they require a lot more information as you're plugging it in. From what I heard, when you learn how to use it properly, it is actually very, very good. I don't use it.
Thank you for answering that. Thank you so much.
Now, if anybody on here is North Carolina licensed, I will tell you this. You have to be a lot more extensive when you go to a listing appointment. It is much more thorough. You have to know plat information. You have to do every bit of due diligence when you are trying to list in North Carolina. So we get it a little bit easier here, but in North Carolina, it is much more extensive. Like it needs its own class. Any other questions? Jordan, do you want to wrap us up or are you ready? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I have a question I posted in the comments. You're on the page that I'm interested, the credentials and awards. There's another one that I was working on yesterday. And when you're a new agent, you don't have numbers. And I know other new agents are asking the same question. What can we put there? And I was suggested that we could use the office, the Hilltop office numbers to plug in to talk about some stuff and say that we're part of a team. Yeah. So where would we find those numbers to plug in to fill these pages? for the
So,
credentials and awards, leading
So
in the
it-
industry numbers.
yeah, it may be in your best interest to just delete those pages from the presentation because you don't have to have it in there. You can utilize what we've done in the office, but I would just be very careful with it because you don't want to put any false expectations out there. Like you don't want them to find out later that you were. I would just be very careful. I would, me personally, when I was new, I'd rather exclude it from my presentation than put myself in a position to talk about something that I that wasn't mine or however you want to do it. But if you want to see what our office does, you should be able to pull it up from market reports and because you have like all of our active listings and stuff like that, and you can look up sold listings in the past 6 months, and so you can pull it from there. But I'm not sure how effective that's really going to help you when you're doing a listing presentation, because if you think about it, when you're in front of a seller, they care more about what you're going to do for them and not what you've done in the past. So they want to know how you're going to market it, if you're going to do open houses, what social media platforms you utilize, if you're covering their pictures. Like there's so many other things that you can keep them focused on than the fact that you're new. So you can pull our office information. You can say that you work with a team of agents at the office and that, you know, they've done 167 sales in the past 6 months. However you want to try to present it, I would just be very careful with overselling yourself too much and it backfiring on you when you can just literally remove the page. Does that make sense, Regina?
Yeah, that makes sense. I was thinking about already, I actually removed the pages and thought that I could look up the stats and just talk about it and say that I'm part of a team and I have these resources to work with all these people.
Absolutely.
And there's nothing that we can't handle together for you.
Absolutely. That's an excellent way of doing that. And after you told me that you said something in the chat, I went back and I looked and I saw somebody else was wondering how I got here. So let me show y'all real quick when y'all get to, so when you log into Command, the first page that it brings up, this is where your dashboard is and this is where you're at. So if you go down your column here, down to designs, click on that. And I go under print, but it may be under other things as well. But like as you pull up different ones, it will show you different things that you can actually do. So as I go under print, I will hit the plus sign down here, make sure print is highlighted, click on next, and it automatically brings me to this working template area. Listings was under listings and listing presentations. And then you just click on one that you want to look at, you click on use, and you start to edit it that way. And then you'll be able to plug all of that in. I love Command. I understand that it's had a lot of glitchiness with it, but I feel like Command just makes me feel super cool while I'm navigating through it. So I'd like to think it's going to make you feel super cool because you're able to create these really stylish designs when normally you would think that you would have to hire somebody to do that. So it makes me feel very cool and I like using it because you can add your own images. Like it's very easy just to upload ones from your computer. You can add the snapshots for the neighborhoods. You can add logos. Like if you have a logo design for yourself, or if you need to pull up KW ones, they're all right here. I love Command. I'm a fan. So I want you guys to start playing around with it because it's got a lot of great designs and really seeing what it can do for you because it's awesome. I know I encourage all my mentees to do it. So I would hope that you guys do it as well. Make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, and Shelly says there's some great videos on YouTube for Command. Shelly's my research girl. She'll sit there and look everything up.
That's awesome.
Jordan, is
That's what you
there
gotta do.
anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up here?
Nope. I'm all wrapped up. Holly, you did a great job. Just want to thank you guys all for coming here and being here and going through this stuff with us. All of us are always here if you have any questions about doing the CMA. Or if you wanted any further clarification on what we did, what our thought process was, anything like that. But thank you guys so much for coming.
Wonderful
Thank
training. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.